Hello everyone, welcome to the Autodesk Flame 2011 presentation. My name is Bill Ennis, and I'd like to take you through this new version, which is really full of great new features. I'd also like to mention that we're working with the creative 3D finishing demo of Flame, Flare, and Maya. And also I'd like to thank a few people who provided material for this demonstration, McRae Laboratory in Japan, and also CBS Digital in Hollywood. So thanks to them. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is getting media into the system now in 2011, Flame 2011. Let's start by creating a new library. So I'm just going to go ahead and start by naming the library Import Red Media. So let's go ahead and start with a fresh library. Let's go to the network, and under the network you'll see on my local frame store here I've got a new remote frame store access. I've got a gateway library. So here's my frame store and here's my gateway, and if you look in the gateway, these are all the different volumes that are attached to my network. A great new feature in 2011 of Flame is the ability to set selection sets, or basically rules that allow me to quickly access different parts of that gateway network. So if I wanted to go and find my red media, I just go to my selection set pop-up, which can be saved either to my user or to the individual project, and now I can go down and find all of my media very quickly. So no longer do you have to kind of drill down into these different folders to look for things. You can set that up as a rule. And you can see I can quickly go to the EXRs or back to the red just very quickly that way. Now that we've got that set up, let's enter the library. Let's switch to the dual view, and we'll come down and set the import library to be our gateway library. And you can see we've got our red media here, which we can scrub through. Now you can either swipe to the right, or you can use the hotkey Control and P to bring up a new player for each of these individual clips. So let's go ahead and double click on that clip and play that down in the player here. Now you can see that I can also quickly scrub through if I don't want to wait for that to play back. The other thing you can see here is a bunch of metadata associated with this clip. So you can see that we've got the resolution, the type of format, the path, all of the information, date, time, and so on. The next thing I want to do is just sort of quickly mark an in and out on this clip. So let's go in and say right before she starts to turn, let's set an in, and on the other side of the turn, we'll set an out. Now it's easy enough to modify the out point. We can even just use jogging here. So let's take 6 seconds from that particular clip. Under the debearing, under the metadata tab, there's also the debearing tab. So we got originally set to quarter res, but I could go ahead and change that to half res if I want. I could also say that as I'm soft importing this file, let's also store a local copy, or hard import that as well. We can do all that simultaneously in one step. At this point, all I need to do, and this is what's great about 2011, is I can simply drag that red media up into my import red media library and just drag and drop that. And you can see that very quickly it's going to go ahead and flag that clip with a pending render, because it's doing all that under the hood, that soft importing and hard committing or storing that local copy onto our frame store automatically. And what's great is I can again use just the in and out marked parts of that clip, and I can make as many of these selections as I want, just continuing to drag and drop that into my new import red media library. The other thing that's great about this clip is I can go back to the import history at any time. So as I'm working with the clip, I can decide to go ahead and change the resolution of the footage underneath. So all I need to do is go to import history, toggle view clip history to modify clip. Notice the store local copy button is also here. And then we go back to our debearing settings, and we could say let's actually make this full resolution after the fact. And now if we apply those changes, reselect the clip, you'll see now that we have that clip at full 2K 2048 by 1152 at 12-bit. And again, if we didn't want to store the local copy, we would get a different color icon. So if I wanted to go back to my import settings, I'll turn off the local copy here. We'll just try this on another shot. Just do a couple of in and out points, drag and drop this shot up, and you can see the icon is a light gray because it's only being soft imported instead of the darker gray, which indicates that it's being both soft and hard imported into the system. If we load the clip up now to the desktop, notice that I can play the clip back right away and begin working with it. And even though it is being, again, soft imported and simultaneously being hard committed to the frame store, I can just scrub through this, play it back, and interact with it as I wish. Okay, so let's get back in and play that clip now. We can see that now we've gone ahead and linked to the clip over that gateway, and we've also stored a local copy because we're no longer dropping frames here. And again, that's completely transparent to the user. So our 2K 12-bit red file has been instantly brought into our system, and we're allowed to work with it. So let's go ahead into batch and start to work with that particular clip. So we're going to bring that into batch. Let's also bring out an action node. We can connect that up. Let's add a media layer and send the front to it. We can hold down T and also go ahead and set the duration of our timeline. So let's move down to the last frame of this particular clip. You can see that the resolution of action isn't set to the background resolution yet. We can do that quite easily under the node setup, and I'm going to introduce now a light into the scene. Now, the really exciting thing about this release of Flame 2011 for me is really the three major changes in the quality of what gets rendered out of the application in action. So those three areas that I want to discuss in this demonstration are really the new pixel shader architecture, as well as the new image filtering options, and also the new hardware anti-aliasing options, which we'll take a look at in the next example. So these particular changes to the application were really, really major and really drastically have changed the quality of the rendering. It's really these techniques that we're now using in action are really inspired by the GPU technology that's used in game engines. So you'll see that the quality is really, really good. Let's go ahead and start by changing the intensity of the light. Let's move that up. We can also change the spread of the light. And you can see that there's really no pixelation anymore on the surfaces. As we change our lights, you get very smooth shading. So let's go ahead and move the light back. We can zoom out a bit more, maybe rotate that a little bit more toward her face. Something like that. We can even adjust the fall off, and you can see we can get a really nice, smooth, subtle amount of fall off on that light. And again, as we move the light around, you can see there's really no issue with our new pixel shading. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to go in and start to work with the profile of the light. So let's go in and go to the profile menu here, and you can see that as I make adjustments now, you can see that I'm going to have some adjustments made to the actual profile. And then we can add points to the profile as well. We can bend these around. As you can see, I can actually kind of sculpt a different type of a profile on my light. So now I've got something that has almost like a flashlight look. Let's go to the surface and apply some shininess to the surface. So again, you can really see the quality in the shine. There's a much more subtlety to the way the lights are interacting with the surfaces. The next thing I'll do is go to the specular. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of color into the light there. Something like that. And now as we rotate the light around, we'll see that the highlights are now being picked up on the surface. Specular highlights. The other nice, really nice new feature inside of Action is the ability to work with something called the working view. So we're all really liking this. We can quickly switch to the working view without having to add another camera. I can just bring in another view and see my result camera very easily from the working view. So just like in a 3D application, we now have the ability to quickly switch to this type of a view. And again, I can easily zoom in and out of that view. Let's reselect the surface and change the type of surface to an extended bicubic and subdivide that. We'll select the center point and kind of pull that back to kind of exaggerate the specular highlights so that we can really start to give ourselves a bit more of a more interesting look. And you can see the subtlety again as I start to move in, orbit the camera around. You can see that quality that I've been mentioning is really, really, really nice. Looks great. The other thing on the surface level I mentioned before is the ability to change the type of filtering. So you can see now under the surface we have by default linear filtering, but we can use anisotropic with linear, and elliptical weighted average filtering, and elliptical weighted average with linear filtering, as well as nearest. So there's a lot of different options here. If you wanted to, you could also go just and use the EWA filtering just when you process, or you can leave it on all the time. It's just a preference here under the setup menu, and you can also have your default preference setup be any one of those options as well. So a lot of different choice there. Let's split the views. I'm going to also now introduce you to the new pixel shading option, which can be done on a per surface basis. So here I can add a pixel shader to my surface and go ahead and switch to, by default, we have a default setting, but we can also switch now to the anisotropic. You can see that just by making some adjustments, you can quickly get the idea of the benefits of working with pixel shading. You can see we really can dial in exactly the type of look that we want. We can also use the Fresnel offset, and again, we can really start to get almost like a glow on the surface. If we switch to Cook Torrents, start to play with the roughness here, maybe to play around with the Fresnel offset as well, we can start to get a completely different type of look. And again, the lights and the position of the lights really makes a drastic effect on our subtle effect on our surface. Let's go back to the shader. We can also use Fresnel, and let's go back to the default shader. That looked really good. So again, if we move our camera around, looking through at our working camera, you can see just the quality that we're talking about in this new version. In action, you will no longer see any lighting differences between lights on surfaces and 3D geometries, which is very important. So I wanted to talk about the consistent lighting results that you can now get in action. So what I have here is actually a setup with a garbage mask that was extruded, created in the garbage mask area, re-imported, and then as a vector object, and then extruded on the right side. So we've got, and it's also been deformed. And then on the left side, what we have is a bilinear with a light position in much the same way. And you notice here, if I select the axis that's controlling both of those lights, and I start to move that light back and forth, you'll see that we're now getting, because of the pixel shading engine, we're now getting a very nice, consistent look across both our geometric surfaces as well as our images. So this is really the benefit of working with the pixel shading architecture. So what's great is the shading pipeline in action is no longer tied to the polygonal resolution of the surfaces and the 3D objects. Regardless of the number of polygons, the lights will get smooth specularity. So the quality in action has really improved dramatically, which is great. Another nice new feature that came into action was the ability to do instancing on objects on a 3D path. So let's take a quick look at that. So I'm going to bring an action node out of the bin here, and let's go in and add a 3D text. And we'll go ahead and change the text to something that will work pretty well. Let's just create a bunch of eyes here that'll make a long string for us. Let's go ahead and change the size a bit. We'll also give it some depth. Just kind of give it a little bit of depth there. Let's add a light into the scene. Again, we can see the light interacting with the 3D. We'll move the light back quite a bit. Maybe around 2000 will be good. And let's also move it in X quite a bit, so we can kind of get it pretty far back, because we actually made a lot of these characters when we brought that in, and maybe up just slightly as well. And we'll change the intensity, bring that up, and get something going like that. So currently, if we select our text, you can see we've just got a long row of text. In the schematic view here, I'm going to go ahead and introduce a 3D path. But I can actually do this by double-clicking on the icon. I can actually hold down Shift and just draw a path that I want. And at this point in the schematic, if I just connect it down to my text, you can see that instantly I have the text interacting and going along the surface of that path. So it's really easy to set up these types of animations. We could even go in and apply some banking to this. We could go to our 3D path and we could take the middle point here and just start to adjust that to create some banking along that path. Maybe something like that. We could also go in and adjust the angle. So we'll go in and do that as well. So that's going to give it a little bit more of an offset. And that's working pretty well. So again, if we go back to the main axis, we can rotate that around and we can see I've got a very long string of text working pretty well along that path. So the fact that it's now Action is now supporting instancing means that we can easily bring in more axes, add those into the scene. We'll position those above the original axis of the 3D path and connect that down. And now you can see we have unique copies that quick of our 3D text and our path. So we can just kind of offset these different layers a bit to create our different instances. And if we add another across the top here, we can go ahead and duplicate and do all of our standard things that we would typically do here. So now we've got our duplicated axis all being controlled by the top axis. Something like that will work pretty well. And finally, what I want to do here is I want to talk about the character animations on top of that. So again, we can go in and, because we're instancing, we have the ability to quickly and easily create any type of a character animation on top of the 3D path that we've already been working with. So again, quite a lot of things that you can do with this feature of instancing along a 3D path. Another great feature in Flame 2011 is the ability to work with hardware anti-aliasing. So I mentioned the new pixel shader architecture, I mentioned the new filtering options like EWA, and now let's talk a little bit about the hardware anti-aliasing. So with this setup, this was a good one to actually work with, because this really illustrates the different angles that you can get when working with something like instance 3D text. So you can really get some issues as you have these different angles. And if we zoom in, you can really see what's going on with the kind of jagged edges on our 3D text. Well, in batch, under the main setup menu, you'll notice now there's a hardware anti-aliasing area. Currently, we're working with no hardware anti-aliasing, but you can see here on the Flame, we can actually change that setting to either 4 times, 8 times 16, or even up to 32 times the number of samples to do our hardware anti-aliasing. And just by changing that, turning that on, we can come back now and you can see that we're going to get really nice clean edges on all of our 3D text. You can see that it's really creating a nice smooth edge even with very difficult angles that we see in this example. So that's a really fantastic new feature. I mean, that's one of my favorite ones, and again, all in the name of making the quality even better. And of course, all of these implementations to the quality in terms of the pixel shading, the filtering options, as well as the new hardware anti-aliasing, really don't have an impact on what we like to call the Flame experience. The system is still really, really fast and delivering the performance that you would really come to expect on a Flame system. Finally, if I wanted to, we could go back and just sort of bring in a layer and project that layer onto the surface. So let's just take our balloon image here. Instead of using it as an image, let's just sort of get rid of that, and we'll reuse that now as a projection map. Pull that projection map into the scene. We can connect that to our camera in the schematic view. That way we'll have the camera kind of pointing that projection in the correct direction towards our objects. We can switch that into a multiply mode, maybe pull that back a bit, and now here in the one-up view, as we start to move our camera around, you can see that our hardware anti-aliasing is keeping nice, clean, smooth edges, and our instance 3D geometry is working very nicely in this scene. All right, so next thing I wanted to do was to take a look at the new maps. So let's go ahead and pull out sort of a jump ahead here that I have. And let's take a look at what we have so far. So if you notice in the action tool bin here, we've got a new division of some of the objects here. So we've got our main objects, then we have our surfaces which have been reorganized, and there's some room for some more to come in. And we also have a new tab for maps. So what's really exciting about the maps is that they've been reorganized into a new menu, and they have many new maps. And what's also cool is the old maps have been reworked under the hood. So I'd like to start going through some of those maps. So let's go ahead and split the views. We've got our image here, and what I wanted to talk about was just the difference in the look that you're going to get now within Action. So we talked about the new pixel shading engine, the architecture. There's really a much better quality, and then the looks with the lights are much more subtle. So the adjustments and the position of the lights really makes quite a big difference, and I think this is a good example to show that. So let's go ahead and add a displacement map into the scene, and we'll go ahead and start to pull out the luminance values of this particular map. So we'll go in and just make a few adjustments to the softness as well. And let's go ahead and do that, view this through our working camera. So again, we can just switch to that at any time and go ahead and move around and kind of go through our scene from another camera's point of view. So if we look here in the back, you can see that you know, our displacement has really kind of pulled the luminance values out. So the kind of big thing here is if we go back and we actually go in and introduce a light, as you'll see, as I pull the light back, let's move that back quite a bit. Let's make it kind of an even number there. We can see that the look is actually quite different with the displacement. So you can see again, kind of a different way of looking at the same environment. If we go back to our displacement, we could start to make those adjustments, you know, exaggerate that a little bit more. Or we can go back to the surface now and show you that if we turn on the shine, we get a completely different type of a look. You can see that we've got, again, a much more almost plastic kind of look because of our new pixel shading environment. And again, if I sort of go all the way around to the back, you can see that it is dramatically different. And if we start to go back to our surface and adjust the resolution, you can see that even though we're changing the number of polygons, the specularity on the surface is not changing. So that's what's really exciting here about working with this new architecture with the pixel shaders. And if we turn on a wireframe view, this will illustrate it even better. So you can see that the specularity is consistent across the surface, even with our resolution changing. So it's quite a nice change. The next thing I want to talk about is reflection maps. And you can see if we actually pull the light back even more, and let's just go back to the perspective view for a second and start to move that light in X, you can see that that specularity is really picking up the highlights very well. So you can see that this new pixel shader architecture is going to allow for a lot more photorealistic looks. Let's go ahead and throw away the displacement map, and let's also deactivate the shine value and throw that away, and let's also kind of reset our shine. And let's go back to our regular result view. And let's take a look at another map that was sort of reworked, and that's the reflection map. So there are a lot of new options for the reflection maps, like mirror repeat. There's a new additive mode. There's also a visibility menu, which was implemented because of the stereo workflow, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But let's go ahead and start with the reflection map. So as before, you could add a reflection map, and you could see through and basically get a very reflective texture there if we move our camera. So let's go to the reflection map itself. Again, here under the texture, you can see that there's a visibility menu, which is new, and you can see that we can actually work with both monoscopic and also the left and the right eye for our stereo workflow. So let's start with a mirror repeat option. Let's go ahead and turn that on. We can start to scale the texture down, so we can go pretty far with that. You can see we can create a nice repeated mirrored image there. We can then toggle the repeat mode from replace to additive, and if we start to orbit the camera, you can see that now we're getting a much better reflection in our reflection map. The other thing that we can do, of course, is we could add a light back into the scene. That's going to really help a lot. Let's move the light around. You can see if we move the light back pretty far, let's take that back here. Let's also go back to the surface and turn on the shine. You can see that now if we orbit the camera, you can see that the reflection looks even more convincing. And again, the quality looks really good. The next thing I want to do is go back into to the reflection. You can see if I want to, I'll turn on the regen button so that as I make my adjustments, I'll be able to view those in real time. And under the controls, I have control over the effect. So if I start to adjust the effect, you can see that I can kind of get a much more subtle reflection. I can mix that in to a much more subtle amount. So maybe we could do something like a 50% reflection. We can also go in and soften. So what's great about using these new pixel shader GPU accelerated maps is that you can actually do blurs directly on the maps themselves. Instead of having to do that through the media layers, you can get a much more much faster GPU accelerated version of your blurs. And you can also have gain control on diffuse maps, which is great. So you can see here we are able to create a nice reflection map now using the reworked reflection map that we saw in this example. The last thing I want to do is I'm going to turn the shading off, and I'm just going to get rid of all of this and talk about something else. So the last thing I want to do here is just get rid of the reflection map. Let's also get rid of the light, and we'll reset our shine value. And let's add another reworked map, which is the diffuse map. So diffuse maps used to be called wrap textures, but the diffuse map has been renamed to a wrapped geometry UVs. And there's also a lot of new functionality in here. So we can actually now wrap a different resolution image onto a diffuse map, and you can use the perspective mapping as an option, which is a powerful re-entry tool in action. So there's also some new options for cropping and resizing and things like that, and we'll take a look at those in just a minute. But what's great about the diffuse maps here is we can go in, and if we turn regen on, we can actually have gain control. So you can see I can actually use the gain control here, and we also have, again, as I mentioned before, the ability to do very high speed, high quality blurs directly on the diffuse maps and other maps. So this again allows us to do these things directly on the maps themselves, which is great. So I mentioned the new functionality for the diffuse maps. So let's go in and take a look at that. Let's turn on the tile repeat mode. You can see here I'm working with a film image that's 1828 by 1332, and you can see I can basically scale that down, tile that down, and of course we're working with square pixels here. But notice if I just get rid of that and I go back to my media layers and I bring in another diffuse map, but using a different layer with a different resolution as well as a different aspect ratio, you can see that right away what we've got is that basically that image re-entered into our original film image. So you can see the difference in our size here. So what I can do next is actually go into the front view, on the left side for that particular layer. And I'm going to turn on a crop. And I can interactively adjust that crop. You can see it's going to basically change the position around my axis. Let's also go in and quickly tile this image.